Would you turn in your Bibles once again to the book of Revelation, chapter 12. We left off in chapter 12 last week, and so we're going to pick up there again. Chapter 12. And you know, when I was growing up, I loved Western movies and Western shows. The Rifleman, The Lone Ranger, Gunsmoke. How many of you remember those? Yeah, you know, it's just great shows. And you know, what's interesting is that in the Westerns, you could always tell who the good guys were and the bad guys were. Because the bad guys always wore black hats and they rode black horses. And the bad guys always wore black hats and rode black horses. The good guys always wore what color hat? White hats or light-colored hats, and they rode white horses. And that was kind of the classic stereotype of many of the Western movies, probably until Clint Eastwood came along in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because he was the good guy wearing a black hat. So, you know, he kind of changed that. Well, tonight we're going to look at the good guys and the bad guys of the tribulation period. And there are some distinctly different descriptions of them. We're going to start with the bad guys here in chapter 12, and we've already been introduced to the first one, the worst of the bad guys, the dragon himself, Satan. And we left off last week in chapter 12 where we saw that war in heaven. And Satan being cast out of heaven, where he was given no more access to heaven. And if you were with us a few weeks ago on Sunday morning, we looked at how even to this day, he has access into heaven. But he gets thrown out here during the tribulation time, and he has no more access. And we saw his reaction there in verse 12, where it says, "The devil has come down to the earth having great wrath because he knows his time is short." So he comes down to earth, he is ticked off. He is upset. He knows his time is short. So we pick up tonight in verse 13 where we see things are going to get intense for those on planet Earth. Verse 13 says, "And when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child." Verse 13 puts us at the midway point of the tribulation period, and Satan sets his sights on the nation of Israel, on the Jewish people. And Satan really has a threefold plan during the tribulation, and that is to destroy the nation of Israel, to destroy or devour the saints, those who come to Christ during the tribulation period, and to determine who's going to rule the world. Is it going to be Jesus Christ or his guy, the Antichrist? And so he sets his aim here on the people of Israel in chapter 13. The woman, we talked about this last week, the woman who gave birth to the male child, that child being Jesus. And we saw last week that how Jesus came from the Jewish nation. He was of the tribe of Judah. He was of the lineage of David, the house of David. And Satan wants to destroy the Jews. And so he is going to launch this incredible wave of anti-Semitism like the world has never seen before. But I want you to notice in verse 14, it says, "But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time, from the presence of the serpent. And so the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth." And so when the devil turns his attention toward Israel, the Lord is going to protect the nation of Israel in a special way. The wings of an eagle are pictures of God's protection for his people, and he leads them to be protected to this special place for 3.5 years. And many scholars believe that this place could very well be the rock city of Petra. I think we have a picture of this. It is a place that is over there in the Middle East. I've actually never been, but on one of our Israel trips, if we ever go again, I would love to do the extension and go to this place because I've heard it's absolutely amazing and it can actually house quite a lot of people. And so they are protected from Satan in whatever way that he is seeking to come against them. When it says a flood, that could be a literal flood. It could be used to picture as a flood of troops. But either way, I like the idea of a literal flood and God just opening up the earth and causing the water to be, just dissipated. But either way, God somehow protects them. And when Satan cannot reach the Jewish people, he then turns his attention toward the followers of Jesus, those who will come to Christ during the tribulation time. We notice in verse 17 it says, "And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." Now, I want to just pause here and say that all believers, all of us, including us right now, are the offspring of Israel. God told Abraham that he was going to make of him a great nation. And he did that at a time when Abraham didn't have any kids. He was really, really old. And God makes him this promise that he would make of him a great nation. And from his offspring, all the nations of the world would be blessed. And that was a direct prophecy of the coming Messiah. That the Messiah, Jesus, would come from the offspring of Abraham, that he would come through the lineage of Judah, that he would come from the house of David, that he would be Jewish. And so all of us who have come to Christ are an offspring of Israel. We're an offspring of the people of God. But I believe that this group it's speaking of are those who are going to come to Christ after the rapture and during the tribulation time. And I want you to remember that chapters 10 through 14 are these parenthetical chapters where we've paused in the narrative of the judgments. We had the seal judgments, and then we had the trumpet judgments. Next week, we're going to get to the bowl judgments in chapters 15 and 16. But in the midst of this time, as chapter 10 begins, God's pausing, and he's giving us all this insight into what's happening in the world at this time. And so in chapter 12, we see Satan's plight. He gets thrown out of heaven. We see his purpose, that he wants to come against the people of God, the Jewish people, the tribulation saints. And then in chapter 13, it tells us how he plans to carry out his plan. So notice verse 1 of chapter 13. "Then I stood on the sand of the sea." This is John writing. "And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his throne, and his great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And all of the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon, who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast, and who is able to make war with him?'" He's invincible, in other words. "And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months, or 3.5 years. And then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. And it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe and tongue and nation. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. And he who leads into captivity shall go into captivity, and he who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. And here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So here in Revelation chapter 13, we are introduced to bad guy number 2, the Antichrist. A man who will come on the scene, who will make guys like Hitler and Stalin and Genghis Khan and Ivan the Terrible look tame in comparison. Now, we've actually already seen him. We saw him in chapter 6, verse 1, at the beginning of the tribulation period, when he comes on the scene masquerading as a good guy. It'll be on the screen, but notice chapter 6, verse 1 says, "Now I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying with a voice like thunder, 'Come and see.' And I looked, and behold, a white horse." White horses are for good guys, right? So he comes on the scene looking like a good guy, masquerading on a white horse. He's trying to look like what Jesus is going to look like when he comes back. But the rest of the next part of the verse reveals his true intentions when it says, "He sat on it and had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer." He comes on the scene and he's looking to set up his authority. He's looking to conquer those who get in his way. Now, this man, we know him as the Antichrist, but he's actually only called that in the book of 1 John. But the Bible gives us 9 different names for the Antichrist in the Bible. They'll be on the screen. I'll go through them. He's called the little horn in Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 9, he's called the coming prince. In Daniel chapter 11, he's called the willful king. In Zechariah chapter 11, he's called the worthless shepherd. In 2 Corinthians chapter 2, he's called the man of lawlessness and the son of destruction. In 1 John 2, he's called the Antichrist. In Revelation chapter 6, he's the rider on the white horse. And here in Revelation chapter 13, he's called the beast. Let's consider here what we can learn about this Antichrist character in Revelation chapter 13. In verses 1 and 2, we see his background. We see that he rises out of the sea. Now understand, in biblical typology, the sea is always used as a picture of the Gentile nations. Over and over again in the Old Testament prophecies, you have 2 places that people came out of. The land, which referred to the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel, they always came out of the land. But the sea always referred to the Gentile nations. And so him coming out of the sea is him coming out of a conglomeration of the Gentile nations. And also understand, when John sees this beast, it's not just a person that he's seeing. It's not just a creature that he's seeing, but he's seeing what this beast represents. So it's speaking not just of this person, but of his kingdom in which he rules. In much the same way, if I was to mention Nazi Germany, you would immediately think of Hitler. Because Hitler was the one that was ruling Nazi Germany. And really, you don't separate Hitler from the Nazi regime. In the same way, you don't separate the beast from this kingdom, this empire that he rules in. And when John describes the beast, he's speaking about this, the beast, this character, this leader, as well as his emperor. And I think it's made clear in the description he gives us of the beast. Notice he describes him as having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, if you were with us last week when we were looking at there in Revelation chapter 12, the dragon, he also had 7 heads and 10 horns. That's how he was described. And this is symbolic of the same thing. The 7 world powers that have been led by Satan since the creation of Israel. Those empires would be Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and then this final world empire. The 10 horns is a picture of the last of these empires that will be divided into 10 parts, all of which will be ruled by the Antichrist. This picture is seen elsewhere in the Bible. King Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel was given a dream of some world kingdoms that would come after him. I think we have a picture of this as well. And in this dream, Daniel comes to give him the interpretation of this dream. And in the dream, Nebuchadnezzar sees a head of gold. And Daniel tells him that that represented his empire, Nebuchadnezzar's empire, the Babylonian empire. And then after that was the arms of chest and silver that Daniel said represented the Medo-Persian Empire that was going to come after Nebuchadnezzar and actually was going to overthrow his kingdom. And then the next was the belly of thighs in bronze that was representing Greece. And then finally you had the legs of iron representing the 4th kingdom that came after Greece, and that was the Roman Empire. But the last kingdom that Daniel saw would be on the earth when Jesus sets up his kingdom, and that would be this, or comes to set up his kingdom, that would be this kingdom represented by the feet with the 10 toes that are somehow connected to these legs of iron that are represented there. And then we see in Daniel chapter 7 that Daniel is given a vision of 4 different beasts. Again, a similar picture, but a little bit of a different perspective. And here's the difference. The golden statue, that's man's view of the kingdom. This great big statue, this glorious, statue. The beast is God's view. These animals that are out of control. And the first one being the lion with the eagle's wings. And the lion is, it's the king of the jungle. It's the king of the beast. And it's a picture of Babylon, which was the greatest ruling empire at the time. And it's interesting to know that the winged lion, also called the griffin, was actually the symbol of Babylon in that day. Next, he sees the bear raised up on one side and in Daniel chapter 7. And again, spoke of the Medo-Persian Empire. And then after that comes the leopard, speaking of Greece that had this, was very swift in its attack and its conquering. That Alexander the Great, when he come along, he conquered more kingdom in the shortest amount of time of any other leader. And then finally the beast, what Daniel sees next is this horrible beast in Daniel chapter 7 that he couldn't even describe. And he describes there in Daniel 7 how the beast goes away and then it comes back with these 10 horns. And the idea is that this final beast would be a composite of these other beasts, that it would be like these other beasts on steroids, that it would be powerful like Babylon, cunning like the Persians, swift and devastating like Alexander the Great, and world dominating like the Roman Empire. For you see, this leader, the Antichrist, his power, his authority, and his throne, we're told here in Revelation 13, is given to him by Satan himself. So there we see his background. Now let's look secondly at his bogus resurrection and religion in verses 3 and 4. that after the Antichrist comes on the scene with the authority of Satan and in the likeness of so many who have gone before him, something happens that sets him apart. Now, when the Antichrist comes on the scene, I think he's going to, do some things that people are really going to take note of. I think after the rapture, he's going to, think about it. Again, I've mentioned this, that after the rapture takes place, 1 billion people or more vanish from the planet. And think about the chaos that is going to ensue upon planet Earth. And I think he's going to rise up sometime after that with some answers, and he's going to somehow bring some stability. This is going to be how he kind of gets into power. We learn from Daniel 9 and some other passages that he's going to, solve the issue. Right now, we're going to talk about this on Sunday. This stuff happening in the Middle East right now with Israel, and now Iran is making all these threats. And what does that speak of? What is that, talking about? We'll talk about that, on Sunday. But he's going to somehow come and bring some peace. He's going to do what no one else has been able to do and bring peace to, the Middle East. And he's going to somehow allow for the Jewish people to rebuild their temple upon the Temple Mount. He's going to do some amazing things because Satan is going to be empowering him. But those are not going to be the things that really sway the world to follow after him. The world is swayed, we read here in Revelation chapter 13, when he receives a wound, a head wound, and is healed. Verse 14 tells us that he receives a wound from a sword, and verse 3 tells us that it appears like he's dead, like he died. From passages like Zechariah, it may be that his right eye and right arm are rendered useless, because this is what Zechariah said of this event. Woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. A sword shall be against his arm and against his right eye, and his arm shall completely wither, and his right eye shall be totally blind. Whatever happens to him, he's wounded in the head and he appears to be dead, but the head wound is then healed. And some scholars believe that he actually dies and that he's indwelt at this point by Satan himself and is resurrected. But the wording in verse 3, notice it says, when it says as if. And that makes it very possible that this whole thing is just one big satanic scam. Satan is a master at counterfeit, isn't he? He's an angel of light, but he's really darkness. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's his MO. That's his makeup. And one of the things, he always likes to counterfeit the things that Jesus did. And I think that this is his approach at a counterfeit resurrection, but the world buys into it. They're like, this is our guy. This is our guy. And we see that the world, they'll see this bogus resurrection. And in verse 8, it says they fall at his feet and they worship and they buy into his bogus religion, and their worship extends, we're told here in the passage, not just to the beast, but to Satan himself. And Satan is so happy because that's what he's always wanted, is to be worshiped as God. And here it is going to be happening. Which leads me to our third point in verses 5 and 6, his blasphemy. It's funny that every time in Scripture we see the Antichrist, he's described as opening his big mouth. That should have been a name for him, the big mouth guy, And this beast speaks against God and everything that God stands for, his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. We're told here he blasphemes God's name. That would be God's heart and God's character. God's really not loving. That was the original lie, right? He comes to Eve and he says, did God really say Did he really mean that if you ate of this fruit, you're not going to die? In actuality, you're not going to die. You're going to be like God. What was he saying? God's been holding out on you, Eve, all of this time. And doesn't he love to whisper that in our ears as well? Doesn't he love to come and say, God, he's holding out on you. He doesn't really love you. If he did, this wouldn't be happening. And it's that age-old thing. He's going to be blaspheming God's name and also God's dwelling place, his tabernacle in heaven. He'll be, I think, blaspheming. There's no heaven. There's nothing to look forward to. There's no need to worship God. And then he says, and those who dwell there. This is an interesting one to me. Because the Antichrist will speak against those who are in heaven. That's us. We're going to be in heaven, the bride of Christ, raptured. And he's going to speak against us. And I think it's quite possible that he might very well say, you know, all those people that vanished, this is really what happened to them. They were a cancer. They were a sore. They had to be taken out. That's what happened to them. Notice the fourth thing that we're told about the Antichrist in verses 7 through 12 is his battle. In verse 7, it says he comes against the saints of God. Who is that? Well, there are three groups in the Bible known as saints. The first group is the church, the bride of Christ. 49 times in the New Testament, the church is referred to as saints. But secondly, Israel is also referred to 32 times in the Old Testament. God's people are called saints. And then number 3, those who get saved during the tribulation time. 11 times the word saint is used of those who get saved during the tribulation. Because guys, get this, understand this. Hopefully this will not be any of you who are here in this room. But there are going to be people that you know right now, people that you have been talking to and praying for, loved ones, family members, people you work with, people who have sat in a church like this and listened to the gospel, but have never opened up their heart to Jesus. And when the rapture happens, if I was God, I would have it happen on a Sunday. Because I know in every single church, there would be people left behind. And just think how crazy that is going to be. And then some of those people, they're going to wake up. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, they were right. They were right. This is what they've been talking about. This is that crazy thing that I just thought wasn't even possible. And those people are going to get saved. And they will be known as the tribulation saints. And many of them, most of them, will end up being martyred for their faith. Well, I believe it's those two groups here, the Jewish, the nation of Israel, and these tribulation saints that this is referring to, that the Antichrist makes war against and will prevail over for a time. But not us. The church is gone. We're raptured. It's Jewish people here that don't make it to Petra, and people who come to faith during the tribulation time. And notice what it says of this group in verse 9. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. And he who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. These are those who are patient and withstand the persecution that comes from the beast, but they're going to be killed. But I think they're also going to be rewarded there in heaven. And that leads us to consider the third bad guy of the tribulation. That's the guy known as the false prophet. We see here in verses 11 through 18. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had 2 horns, like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth. And by those signs which he granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast, note this, to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand and on their foreheads. And no one can buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. I was reading this week of a couple, I can't remember where they lived, but they were moving into a new tract that was being built, and their address was 666. And they literally petitioned the city to change that address because they're like, we're not having that address on our house. Don't raise your hand, but how many of you would have done the same thing? So we see this false prophet. And notice three things about him. Notice, first of all, his makeup. And I'm not suggesting here when I say that he's like wearing blush and mascara, but who knows? These days, you never know. But this is really speaking of his background and where he's coming from. And John sees this second beast coming out of the earth. Now, that has caused some scholars to believe that this false prophet will be of Jewish descent. Because again, remember in the Old Testament, it said that those who rose up out of the land, I was always speaking of Israel, those who rose up out of the sea were always Gentiles. And so there are those scholars who say, hey, look, he rises up out of the earth. That means he must be Jewish. But I would say to that, the Old Testament scriptures use the word land and not the earth. So it might not be, but it could be. We'll find out in heaven. We'll just have to wait and see on that one. But notice also that this false prophet has horns, but no crowns. And the fact that he has no crowns probably represents the fact that his influence is not political. That's what crowns speak of. But it's more religious in nature. He will be a religious leader. His focus is religious in nature. He's not coming with political power, but with religious influence and prominence. And we see his ministry here in verse 12, that his ministry is to get people of the world to worship the beast. And when the Antichrist comes on the scene, what he is going to do is he is going to set up, we'll see this a little bit more clearly in a couple weeks, but a one world economic system, as well as a one world religious system. And this false prophet is his right-hand man to help him pull this off. That's his ministry. And we see his method in verses 13 through 18. The first thing we see about his method is there are great signs. The first way that he leads the world after the beast is with great signs. Just like we saw with the two witnesses in Revelation chapter 11, he calls down fire from heaven. They did that, and he does that. And I want you to note this. Satan has the ability to produce miracles. That's why it's very, very important that you never ever base your theology or you never ever follow after, some religious leader or group simply based on miracles or signs and wonders that are taking place. You have to look behind the scenes. You got to see what their theology is. What are they talking about? So many of the great cult leaders, they were able to do some miracles. I think it's because Satan was behind them. He can produce some miracles. He has some power. So this guy is going to call down fire for him. The world is going to see those signs and be deceived. The second thing we note in verses 14 and 15 is he makes this image of the beast. That after performing great signs, this false prophet is going to lead the world to worship the beast by setting up this image of him. And this makes me wonder if this will be a literal statue like King Nebuchadnezzar built there in the book of Daniel? Or is this going to be something different? Maybe like a brand or a logo? We're so into brands today, and we're so into logos today, and people love to display them on their cars and, on their stuff and wear their t-shirts. Whatever this is no normal image or idol, because verse 15 says that this false prophet is given power to give this image breath. It's speaking. And the word breath there is not the normal word used for life, though, in the New Testament. So it's not he's given it life, but he's somehow enabling it to speak. And some modern Bible teachers believe that maybe what we're seeing is sort of a clone of some sort of AI or some sort of artificial intelligence. Or maybe it's something like this. Have you heard about this? It's called the Giant image. We have a picture of this. The Giant Company Attractions Limited is an Irish-based company that has developed and is rolling out next year. It's called the Giant, a cutting-edge visitor attraction for the 21st century. The Giant will feature the world's tallest moving statue, standing 54 feet or 5 stories high. And the Giant instantly transformed into an infinite array of spectacular images using patented LED, AI, and different scanning technologies. So it'll be sort of like if you've seen pictures of the Sphere in Las Vegas, which is kind of crazy. If you haven't seen pictures of that, Google it. I mean, I saw one picture of these guys on a golf course, and they're teeing off, and they're hitting down a fairway, and in the distance is the Sphere, and they have the outside of the Sphere looking like a giant kind of happy face or a giant eyeball looking at it. It's just bizarre what they can do with technology. Well, this is going to be like this thing, I mean, look how big that is in comparison to those people, and it's going to be speaking. It's going to be talking. Maybe it'll be something like this, but whatever it is, this is actually coming to the United States next year. 21 cities it's going to tour. They're going to tour this thing, and people are going to be like, wow. So maybe it'll be something like that on steroids. But whatever it is, the false prophet's job is to make the world worship the beast. And he does this by great signs and wonders. He does this by making, this image appear to speak and come alive, and people are just going to be all excited about it. And then the third thing we see about his method is that he makes the world take the mark. The false prophet will require all of humanity on the earth at that time. If they want to function in normal society, they have to take this mark of the beast. And it is so amazing when you think about this prophecy. People won't be able to buy or sell unless they have this mark of the beast. It wasn't long ago where this just whole idea seemed improbable. But now it seems like it's right around the corner. I mean, if you think about it, we see our world is quickly moving toward a cashless society. Banks, every bank offers you free checking if you do direct deposit. Every credit card company and phone company and every other bill company, what do they want you to do? They want you to sign up for automatic bill pay. this technology, a mark on someone's hand or their forehead that has all of their banking information, that enables them. Again, we think that just seems so far-fetched. I remember watching television. This was years ago now, like 10 years ago. This blew my mind because I was like, what in the world is this? Some guy in a big trench coat goes into a grocery store, and inside of his trench coat, he's got all of these pockets, and he's like taking things out, and he's, putting them in his trench coat pockets and each side, and there's a cop, kind of looking at him, a security guy at the grocery store watching him, and so you're like, what is this all about, and you're watching this and like thinking, like, is this like a movie trailer, like what is this? And this guy loads up his car, starts walking toward the checkout stand, and then walks right through, and the checker goes, "Have a nice day." And basically it was depicting this idea that all those groceries were just scanned right there in that moment as he walked out. It was bizarre. And it was some advertisement for some type of a, credit card chip kind of technology. Right now, there was an article not too long ago in Newsweek about Sky Angel, a system to protect children. That a microchip the size of a pinhead could be injected under the skin, and 10,000 volumes of information could be stored there about you. And they're talking about putting these in children as a way to track them. And a lot of parents are like, I like this idea. I mean, we need so much trafficking going on these days, and abductions going on these days. So this false prophet is going to help propagate this idea of this cashless society, taking this mark on the hand or the forehead. And it's interesting today that banks are in favor of a cashless society. Law enforcement is in favor of a cashless society because they know that'll put a dent in the drug trafficking and sex trafficking and all the fraud cases if we can push the world in that direction. Now, there's been a lot written about verse 18 because in the Hebrew and the Greek, as well as other languages, each letter is given a numerical value. And what verse 18 is that those people who are alive at the time, to be able to have wisdom about this man, this false prophet, they're going to calculate his name that it would mean 666. But here's the interesting thing. People have done this for years. If you work really, really hard, you can calculate about anybody's name to be 666. They did it with Hitler's name. They did it with Stalin's name. They did it with Reagan. I think they did it with Obama, and I'm sure somebody has done it with Trump. He's the one, but whatever the origin of the number, without it, man will be in a difficult place. They won't be able to buy or sell without the mark, and if you don't take it, they're going to find a way to take your life. And listen to this. Think about this. What did we learn during the COVID pandemic? We learned that our world will do anything if they're afraid. They'll do anything. They'll listen to anything. And so the masses will take this mark, and it will really be the beginning of the end for them. And so we see here this unholy trinity: Satan, the Antichrist, the false prophet, who are going to lead the world toward destruction. That's their goal. Aren't you glad that we have the real Trinity? That we have God the Father who loves us the way that he does. That we have God the Son who went to the cross and died on that cross to pay the price for our sins. And we have God the Holy Spirit filling us and giving us power to live for Jesus in this day and age. Aren't you glad that we have the real Trinity? Amen. So those are the bad guys of the tribulation. But let's end tonight by looking at the good guys here in chapter 14. Notice he says, "Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of a loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. And they sang as it were a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And these were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits to God and to the Lamb. And their mouth was found no deceit, and they were without fault before the throne of God." Now, we met this group in our study on Sunday, this 144,000. We focused in on them, this special group of Jewish people who will come to Christ after the rapture, who are going to be used by God as these evangelists going throughout the earth. And we actually first met them in chapter 7, where we were told that this 144,000, that they were all Jewish, that they were 12,000 each from the 12 different tribes of Israel. And Sunday in our study, if you missed it, I really want to encourage you, go online, go to our app, and listen to Sunday study as we made some parallels for us, how this group in a sense right now can be a parallel, or we can learn some things about them that are also apply to us right now. But we talked about their seal, that they had their father's name written on their foreheads. We talked about their song, that they have this special song that they sing. We talked about their sanctity, that these are the ones who are not defiled, that they have been very intentional. They live very intentionally about avoiding sin. We talked about their steps, that they follow Jesus wherever he goes. They're these witnesses during the tribulation time. And then we talked about their standing, that they were faultless, it says, before the throne of God. So we talked about that group, if you missed it, on Sunday. I want to move on here, though, and talk about the second group of good guys, and that's the messengers in verses 6 through 11. It says, "Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel, to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, and tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, 'Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and to worship him who made heaven and earth and the sea and springs of water.' And another angel followed, saying, 'Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all the nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication.' And then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, 'If anyone worships the beast and his image, and he receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name.'" So we see this next group, these messengers that are angels. And the first messenger comes on the scene and is saying to planet Earth, "Fear God and give him glory." You know, our world likes to say, "You are supreme. It's all about you. You need to live and look out for number one." But this angel comes on the scene and says, no. God's number one, and you exist for him. You need to live to give him glory. Notice also that this first angel preaches the gospel. And some Bible teachers will say that Jesus cannot come back until the whole world hears the gospel. And the reason they believe that is because in Matthew 24, verse 14, it'll be on the screen, it says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all of the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." And so they say the gospel Jesus can't come back, he can't come at his second coming until the gospel has been preached to all the nations. Well, it's quite possible that that happens through this angel, as he goes around the world and he's telling everybody, preaching the gospel. So the first messenger says, fear God and give him glory. He goes out preaching the gospel. The second messenger says, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. This second messenger, this second angel prophesies about the destruction of Babylon. Now we're going to see in chapter 17, in just a couple weeks, that Babylon in chapters 17 and 18 represents this system, this kingdom of the Antichrist. It represents chapter 17 as the religious system. It's religious Babylon. Chapter 18 speaks of commercial Babylon. And Babylon, the message is, that it promises joy, it promises peace, it promises happiness, but it's all a lie. This is leading towards destruction. And this angel comes prophesying that it's coming down. It's fallen. It's fallen. So the first messenger says, fear God and give him glory. The second messenger comes on the scene and says, Babylon has fallen, has fallen. The third messenger comes on the scene and says, don't worship the beast. And when you think about this, in contrast to the first beast that says, hey, you should fear God and give him glory, this third angel comes preaching a message warning the world against worshiping and following the beast or the Antichrist. It's as if through this angel, the Lord is pleading once again with planet Earth, don't go this way. Don't go this route. Don't do it. Don't be marked by this system. It's what Paul says to us in Romans 12. Don't let this world conform you into its mold, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Be transformed, he says, as you give yourself to God daily as a living sacrifice. But notice the torment of those who follow this system, who take the mark. Notice this, it will not be a momentary torment. It's described in verse 11 as continuing forever. And that is the strongest expression of eternity in the whole Greek language. Forever. Eternity. Now, some people will argue, they'll say, Pastor Rob, do you really think that God is going to punish people forever and ever? That, some people think they call it annihilism, that he's just going to annihilate, just be done with all of those. And they think this just seems so cruel. And so they'll ask that question, do you really believe that? I can't believe that. I can't believe that God would do that. Well, here's how I answer that. The book of Revelation gives this warning in Revelation 22. If anyone adds to these things, God will add to him the plagues that are written in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words of this book, of this prophecy, God shall take away his part from the book of life. And I hope none of you want that for me. I don't want that for me. So here's what I'm going to do. I take the Bible literally. I will let the Bible speak for itself. And if we get to heaven and find out that this meant something different, then okay. But I ain't gonna, I ain't making anything up. So we see the good guys of the tribulation, the 144,000 Jewish evangelists, the messengers, and then we see the third group mentioned here, the saints, in verses 12 and 13. Notice it says, here's the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, they may rest from their labors and their works follow them. Now, once again, I believe that John is speaking here of the tribulation saints, those who are going to come to Christ at that time in the midst of the tribulation, who are going to reject the Antichrist, who are going to reject his system. And they follow Jesus. And as I said, most of them, they'll be martyred for their faith and their resistance. But the Lord says, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord. From now on, they're going to find rest from their labors. They find rest for their standing. They find rest for their turmoil. They find rest for this being in such a difficult time. And I love how verse 13, at the end of verse 13, it says, and their works will follow them. I think that this speaks of that they're going to leave behind a legacy. In my 38 years of being a pastor, I have done a ton, hundreds of memorial services. And in some of them, I listened to people share their stories during that sharing time about the person who died. And sometimes I just sit there and I'm amazed. And I find myself just thinking to myself, man, I wish I would have known that guy better. Because there's an amazing guy, there's an amazing gal. And what are they doing? Their life, they're leaving a legacy behind them in the lives that they touched. And guys, that's what all of us should desire. That we would live in such a way that we would leave a legacy in the lives that we touch, the people who are left behind us. These guys do that. I don't know if they'll be having memorial services at this particular time. The church might be in hiding like it is in Iran or China, but they leave an impact. Well, it leads us to consider the fourth good guy of the tribulation, and that is Jesus himself. Look at verse 14. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the white cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And so he who sat on the cloud thrust his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And then another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar who had power over fire, and he cried with a loud cry to him who had the sharp sickle, saying, thrust in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for the grapes are fully ripe. And so the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horse's bridle, 1,600 furlongs, which is 180 miles. Now, I believe that this is an early description that we have here of the Battle of Armageddon that we're actually going to look at in detail on Sunday as we dive into chapter 16. And we often think of, Jesus being meek and mild, carrying children in his arms. But here we see another side. Same character, though. Same character of God. But we see him coming here in judgment upon planet Earth. And notice, he's not carrying an olive branch. He's not carrying a cross. He comes with a sickle, an implement for reaping the harvest of the earth. We could say that the first time Jesus came to earth, he came as a servant. The second time, he comes as the sovereign king. The first time he came to planet Earth, he came as one obeying, living in obedience and submitted to his Father. The second time he comes as the commander-in-chief. The first time he came to live with a Jewish couple in an obscure town there in Israel of Nazareth. The second time he comes, he'll come with his angels and with his bride to rule over planet Earth. The first time he came in humility. The second time he comes in glorious majesty. You see here, he comes wearing a crown. The first time he came to seek and save the lost. The second time he's going to come in judgment against the lost. Or to put it, the image that we're reading here in the text, the first time he came as the sower. The second time he comes as the reaper. He comes with a sickle in his hand. Now, our friends, wonderful brothers and sisters in the Lord who are in what is known as the pre-wrath camp, those who believe that the rapture happens here in chapter 14. They believe that the first part of this picture is that of the rapture of the church. They believe that the rapture happens before the bowl judgments get poured out in chapters 15 and 16. And because of their thinking, they believe that the first 3.5 years of the tribulation, where the world's experiencing, all that we've read about, so far, is the wrath of Satan, it's the wrath of the Antichrist, but it's not the wrath of God. It's some natural disasters that are happening, but it's not the wrath of God. But as I've shared before, I think they ignore the fact that everything that we're reading in chapter 6 through chapter 18 come from the throne of God. It starts with Jesus opening the scroll. It's God allowing the Antichrist to come on the scene. It's God allowing these things to happen. It's God sending out Jesus really sending out these angels to do all of these things. It's God sending these disasters that are happening. But our pre-wrath friends argue that the actual word wrath of God doesn't start until what we just read there in chapter 14. And then what we see here in chapters 15 and 16, and they like to key in on chapter 16, verse 1, when it says, "Then I heard a loud voice," you might look at it, "from the temple saying to the 7 angels, 'Go and pour out all the bowls of the wrath of God on the earth.'" And so they say this is the first time, there in chapter 14, and then here in chapters 15 and 16, where it's referred to, what's happening is referred to as the wrath of God. But as I pointed out a few weeks ago, I think they ignored chapter 15, verse 1 that says this, "And then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues." Here's the key, "For in them the wrath of God is complete." And I think the word complete indicates that what we have been witnessing since chapter 6 has been the wrath of God. This is just the completion of it, of what we're going to see next week in chapters 15 and 16. But another reason they like to place the rapture here in chapter 14 is because of the language noted here. Look at verse 14 again. "Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown." That is clearly Jesus. And we know in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17, it mentions that the rapture happens, that we're caught up into where? The clouds, to meet Jesus. And so those in the pre-wrath camp, they see this as 2 harvests taking place. The first harvest of wheat is being done by Jesus. And so those in the pre-wrath camp will say, this is the rapture. The second harvest is done by the angel, and this is the harvest of judgment and the wrath of God against the wicked. And I can see in some ways why this makes sense to them, but I have problems with it. The second problem I have with this idea that this is the rapture is the language. I always like to pay attention to the language. And the language here in the text for the word ripe in verse 15 and verse 18 is very, very telling. The Greek word translated ripe in verse 15, it'll be on the screen, it's exarion, and it means dried and withered. I don't think that's a good description of the church. The wheat being, raptured, that we're dry and withered. I think that's a good description, though, of what the world is going to be like after this time of the tribulation. And then there's an actual different word used in verse 18 for the word ripe. It's the word akamazo, and this term means to be at the prime. And the idea is the wickedness of the world had reached its full crescendo. Here the picture is of grapes that are fully grown to their prime. They're bursting with juice. And the idea is the wrath of God upon the world. It's overdue. It's bursting forth in a judgment that is worthy. And this judgment will certainly come. And we're going to see this in some more detail on Sunday. But notice verse 20 when it speaks of blood flowing over an area of 180 miles. This happens, this battle, we'll talk about this on Sunday, happens in the Valley of Megiddo over in Israel. And it's interesting that if you took the square miles of the Valley of Megiddo, it's 185 square miles. Isn't that interesting? Well, here's the deal. Let's close this tonight. Another sobering passage. Aren't you glad you came tonight? It's like, Pastor Rob, when are we going to get out of the tribulation? Soon. We are. I would mention that although the Antichrist is not in power as of yet, he's not here. I mean, he might be alive, but he's not in power. But the spirit of Antichrist is alive and well in our world. The growing outcry of leaders around the world for unity, a oneness, pushing us toward this idea of a global, one world government. Something that seemed impossible is becoming so much more plausible. We see the growing anti-Semitism happening around the world today. People against Israel. We see the anti-God, anti-Jesus, anti-Christian, anti-God's word sentiments are growing to the extreme and getting more aggressive year by year in our world. We see violence and sexual immorality of all sorts growing worldwide, and all of those are going to be marks of the Antichrist and his system. But let me remind you of this in closing tonight. Appreciate your patience. The Bible says where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. And we right now are living in an age of grace. Grace is getting what we don't deserve. Guys, we deserve the wrath of God. Our world deserves the wrath of God. But God is patient because he desires that none would perish, but all would come to repentance. And so he continues to bestow his grace upon this world. He continues to pour out his Spirit. And we need to continue to pray for revival. And that it would first start in our hearts. We need to continue to be witnesses to this lost world, warning them that things are going to get worse, not better. Guys, grab a hold of that. It's a pie in the sky mentality that thinks things are going to get better. It's not what the Bible says. It's going to get worse until the time that Jesus comes. But our hope is in Jesus who is coming. And when he comes, it's going to get better. It's going to get awesome. Amen?